share, especially with my good friend Jason Gerardo. And we've got a great show planned for you. It's really focused on the word giving. I always relate back to Bob Berg, who was on the show and is the author of The Go Giver. And it really opened my eyes to how you can get so much more if you focus on giving so much in advance, and just doing the best you can for as many good quality people as you can. With that said, chat's wide open. We depend on chat to make us relevant and to really ask us questions, share comments, so that we can direct our thoughts and conversations to bring in more value and benefit to you. So, Jason, I know you were on yesterday. You're getting to be a familiar face around here. Looks like you're well appreciated and respected from the audience response. So, and here's Carrie. Before we start off, might as well have our everyday joke. I'm actually putting it on the screen before I get a chance to read it, Carrie, but I know you keep it pretty clean. Carrie Cheeson says, two sardines swim at the bottom of the sea. A submarine goes by. Heavens, what's that? Just a can of people. Okay, I get it. Looks like a sardine can, almost a submarine. So thank you, Carrie, for getting us off to a happy start. Back to you, Jason. Anything you'd like to share with the audience and initial thoughts on giving?
Well, good morning, and thank you so much. And it's interesting that this was the word today, because the first thing I thought of, and this isn't solicited, is that you, Don, you're very giving and you're very open, and sharing your knowledge, sharing this platform, sharing with the community. You're very giving and with your wealth of knowledge. So I do appreciate that, and I don't know if I say it enough, but thank you so much for having me on and for helping me kind of develop with my own right, and the whole group that you have that develops and is growing. That's an exciting thing. Giving is very important. Obviously, it's if you try to inhale and not exhale, or if you try to exhale and not inhale, you're not going to do so well. So it's cyclical. Life is about giving and receiving, and that's the thing that I like about one of the things about Bob Berg's book is about it talks about that, about how your success is about how much you give back and how much you give to people. But it also talks about you have to be open to receiving. And that's something that I've struggled with, because I love to give, I love to be of service, but I've struggled with that receiving. And I think a lot of people do. Like if you look at, giving gifts, most people love to give gifts, but people, when they get a gift, are like, oh, you shouldn't have whatever. But what you don't realize is that you're taking away that other person's ability to be a giver. So it's not about you. So it's about that cyclical. So it's great to have. And the other thing I'll say is there's a Buddhist saying that says to be charitable without the act of charity in mind. And I think that's very important. When giving becomes your nature, it's a beautiful thing. If you give grudgingly, it doesn't really complete that circle. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay, well, I sure appreciate the compliment. I know it was sincere. And, you're absolutely right, as I've seen it work as far as doing everything you can to help other people become successful just makes you more successful in time. And you learn from their success and the process one has to go through. And, I believe, especially when you're on social media, and you have a huge population on LinkedIn. There's 1 billion registered users, and then if you add Facebook and YouTube and all these other social platforms, it gets ginormous. Is being projected by what you do, not so much by what you say or by what you say you've done or will do, because
Right.
It almost shows a lack of confidence when you have to continue to put something out that people can naturally pick up on their own. And, because social media is such a diverse, at times challenging place, safety is really important to most people. And a giver really doesn't have anything to have that's intimidating or threatening, right? If all you do is offer value, well, no one will start to question it. people may question themselves in time and say, well, what did I do to deserve it? Or what do I need to do to continue it?
Right.
But that's when more important conversations take place. I mean, you start from superficial, which is someone's profile, and sometimes that's a question mark. Then you move maybe to an appearance together and you're getting closer, but you haven't really come together. And then afterwards, you may see situations and opportunities. I mean, I had a long call yesterday with Harvey,
Mm-hmm.
And we continue to, exchange notes, what's working, and it's almost like a race when they had the space race, right? Everybody was trying to invent the rocket, the spacesuit, everything else that goes along with it. And as a team, you can do that because people are always trying new things that you may not have thought of or felt comfortable with, but upon success, it's not a concept anymore. It becomes a reality that can be embraced and integrated. So how has your evolution changed in relationship to live streaming and creating value and providing that to others?
I think what's happened is that I've become more of myself. And we've talked about this off camera before, maybe on the show, where, I love to give, I love to be of service. But within that, I think my feeling is, I have to be polished and I have to have notes and I have to be ready and I have to, when I started as a trainer for the company I worked for years ago, I had to fly, I'm in California, I had to fly back to Boston to get certified to be a trainer. And my trainer and the trainer's trainer there, the feedback I always got was, stay out, don't always stick to script. Be open, be yourself, because when you're self and you're giving, it shines brighter. And so
A little bit of lag there.
goes out, how do you handle that? How do you figure things out in the moment? And it just gives me an opportunity.
Well,
it gives me the opportunity to be more myself.
Yeah, and I think, that's a good point because authenticity is a real important element. People seeing you for who you are, as you are in your natural state. And, again, it's one more clue that someone has that can kind of qualify you as somebody that somebody may want to get to know better. And ultimately, the goal is work together. How do you collaborate? How do you join forces?
Right.
So I think that's pretty important. Carl's here. Carl's here quite a bit. Another individual who I found to be just a valuable resource for so many people, always giving, always sharing, always trying to get involved. And, I think it really comes from a sense of abundance instead of scarcity.
Right.
The givers have more to give, and that's why they can give. If it was a stretch or if it was a sacrifice or a challenge, it may not be done as often or it may be done grudgingly. But when it comes just off the tip of your tongue, or when someone says something and all of a sudden something comes to mind to say, well, here's a person I know you might want to talk to, or here's something I learned, or here's a link, or whatever, I think that goes a long way. Kerry explains about his clean jokes. Don, you can always count on me to have clean humor. I grew up with my dad telling vulgar jokes, so I found my niche with the puns and then being clean. Well, good for you. Anybody can be nasty. It doesn't take much, to keep it straight and narrow and clean goes a long way. Carrie says hello to Carl. Have Dr. Marilyn Scott here this morning. I've worked with Marilyn for about 3 years. Has done some great things and just a fabulous individual. If you don't know Marilyn, you should. Marilyn comes back with, I hope you all have a stellar day. And I think that's a great example of not taking the opportunity just to say something about herself, but wishing other people something for themselves. And sometimes it's just turning it upside down that makes it proper. right, is what you might have thought about yourself and was encouraged to say so. You find something about someone else who, doesn't always get a lot of recognition or appreciation, or sometimes isn't even aware of how people feel about them. And in a sense, it's somewhat of an obligation to make it right, and I think that's important. So, you know, as far as giving goes, when did you start to notice that the concept of giving was a good process of receiving or just building?
I think I've always been, and I think it's true for a lot of us that, we're taught that, you have to play with each other and you have to share and things of that nature. So I think giving becomes kind of inherent. But one of the things is that I think that our as a youth, how we respond to that directs how we're going to show up later. So if you're like, oh man, I don't want to share my toys, but you're told you have to share, you might react to that, and later on be kind of more selfish and hold things to yourself. But so I think that's for most of us, it starts off young. And so that was it for me. Like I said, I struggle with giving. I'm sorry, I struggle with receiving. So, and in my business, it's just always been my mindset. I've always, when I've worked with people, I've always wanted to be there for them. I've always wanted to share. And finding opportunities to do that can be the challenge sometimes, because something that's important is that even if you're coming from your heart and you want to give, sometimes you want to make sure, well, you always want to make sure you're giving the right thing. Don't give just, you're like, well, I'm going to give this to everybody. And then you're like, well, but I didn't really want that. So there's that side of it too. So figuring out what to give and when to give was an important lesson for me. And that's one that I learned over time.
Yeah, that's interesting, because when people can understand that, relating to people, being natural with people is so important. And, I've always gone out of my way to kind of ask somebody in a good way, what is it I could do for them?
Right.
There's too many people who presume something, make a fast judgment. Oh, they need this, or I've got more of it to give, and that's what we're given today. Versus what can I do to help you a little bit?
Right.
And a lot of times it's just, hey, can you sit down and talk for a little bit? Nobody really needs things, but everybody needs somebody.
Right.
And the more somebodies you have, the easier it is for you to be who you are. And I've always believed that if you involve yourself in things bigger than yourself, you kind of lose yourself in them. And you're not too worried about the little things, or somebody said something. It's like, well, no one can impact you in ways that you don't allow it to happen to yourself. Right? If someone says today's Tuesday, it doesn't matter how they say it, how loud they say it. In your mind, you're just so sure it's Thursday that it really doesn't impact you. It's just like, well, I guess, or if that's how you feel, and it harkens back to the platinum rule, which I always share. Everybody knows, or should know, the golden rule is do unto others as you want done unto yourself. But the platinum rule is really do unto others as they want done unto themselves. Not everybody eats chocolate ice cream. Some people might like vanilla or strawberry.
Right.
But to think, hey, that's the best ice cream in the world, everybody should have some, is a little too presumptuous. And, you take the opportunities away from people when you don't allow them to share what they're looking for, or what you could do to help them. And I think in any service, you want to provide adequate benefit. So why go out and buy something or do something and someone says, well, thank you so much, but it's really not my bag. With that said, Carrie comes back with another one. I always tell people to have a great and cheesy day. I mean, you should put this to work, Carrie. You got a talent. Christine Feedy's here. I don't know if you know Christine, but she's a good friend of ours. Been with the show since it started. Fabulous lady, just accomplished her MBA, raises a family, has a very significant career at the same time, juggling a lot of balls in the air. And just nice to see faces like Dr. Marilyn, people like Christine. So, it's funny is if you do this show or shows like this long enough, everybody comes home. Some people come home more often, but just knowing they came home meant that there was something of value previously to want them to move forward. And Christine says everyone can be great because everyone can serve. Martin Luther King Jr. So well put and so appropriate for the conversation today as far as giving. And it in the beginning, people don't see how much it does for you, how gratifying it is to give somebody that extra sandwich you're not going to eat, which could be the sandwich they haven't eaten in a while, right? And the pleasure they're having is more than the pleasure you could have, and it just makes you feel good. It's like almost giving yourself a compliment when you provide service for somebody who doesn't expect it and isn't used to it. And it could create more appreciation for humankind, that there are good people out there. You usually hear the mean people, the angry people, the loud people, because they stand out and that's why they probably do what they do. But it's the quiet, soft-spoken people, and even a lot of the people who do things anonymously. There are so many people. I remember I was in Palm Springs and it was a rainy day and me and my wife didn't have much to do. So we took a bus tour of the Stars homes. And it was interesting. Every home just had a big gate and nothing, never saw before, but that's Johnny Carson's home and that's whatever's home.
Right.
Well, when they talked about Frank Sinatra, and he had a big home base in Palm Springs, he was sharing how, his mother joined the church down there when she arrived. And they had a little committee and they were doing an entertainment portion. And they were saying, do you know anybody who would perform here? And his mother said, yeah, I think my son would help you out. Didn't know who it was. And what it turned out is that Frank Sinatra did as many charity events as paid events.
Wow.
So half of what he did was unknown to a lot of people. And he had done things for so many people who had a good time but turned on bad times anonymously. So whether it was a heart operation or whatever, and I think that shows confidence in one's success, is that not everything is a dollar, and the satisfaction you get from helping people once you've been helped makes a difference. So, you never know what you don't know. People always hear about the scandals and and when you're 24/7 and people are taking pictures of you and getting involved in your daily activities, that's not always the best approach, but it's what you do in the dark that makes the difference, that only I think can really turn the tide for so many people. So, with live streaming, that gives all of us a chance to give more to so many people, and even people we'll never see or meet who tend or gravitate to this program in the future. Right. So what has live streaming done for you?
It's been a great to build community. That's really, it's about getting out there and talking to people. And I love community for a lot of different reasons, because obviously in community we grow. I always say in community we grow and in community we heal. And that's two very important aspects about who I am and what I do. And so live stream has brought me in front of a lot of amazing people and a lot of great conversations. And not only through the business side, to where I'm doing podcasts with, I'm doing work with Kelly and Jason Wilson. We're working on something, and I've been on other people's shows, and they've been so gracious. And I forget everyone's name right now. I apologize. Been so gracious and invited me on. So it's opened up the door for a lot of opportunities, because everyone is in this community is so giving, and so a lot of things have shown up. And I think it's about, you show up, you give, and then things come back to you. Something I was thinking about with, so with the live streaming, yeah, it's been great. It's given plenty of opportunities. The one thing I wanted to say about, kind of we talk about success and about growth and things of that nature on the business side too, is show up and do more than is expected of you, and that's how you grow, is that you don't show up and say, well, put hands out, what do you got for me? It's what can I do? Do more than's expected, and grow and push. And I know that's a touchy subject right now, with loyalty, company loyalty, and the company being loyal to you and stuff. And it's a much different world than when you came up, and even when I came up. It's a much different world right now. There's no more, the gold watch doesn't exist as much. However, for you and your personal growth, it's best to be a giver and give more than than you're looking to receive. It's like, hey, how can I help? Let me roll up my sleeves and jump in. Something that I think someone talked about getting a mentor. And some people will go to a mentor, somebody that's excelled in their field and that's really good, and say, oh, I want you to help me. What's that person going to do? Is that person going to be like, oh, great, let me take all my time and energy and help you? But if you show up and you say, hey, I really respect what you do, I love to help. How can I help you? And that'll be a reciprocal relationship. And I think that's going to get you more, a better result. And that's what this community is about people showing up for other people, and it all works out for all of us.
Yeah, I think you hit it right on the nose. And, to add to that, what I found is, it's better to start as a friend than as someone looking for a client, someone looking to fill a gap somewhere.
Right.
Because not everybody's on your timetable. Not everybody has the same priorities you have. So to think of, hey, this person would be great. Usually what isn't said is that person be great for me. Instead of saying, I could really help this person, or I see opportunity. I don't know what the opportunity is. I don't know when it may take place, if ever. But I know that, the more I'm around this person, the more I work with this person, the better I feel about myself and my future. And, it has to be right for both parties, or it's not right for either one.
Right.
I had a dog one time, just great dog, but if you let him outside, he wouldn't know how to come back. He wouldn't even know what house he lived in. So every time we went on a ride with him, we had to close the garage door and then open the door, because if he got out, it was forever. And I remember early on, as I chased him, he would run further. And only until I ran away from him would he run towards me. So what your initial thoughts are may not be your best thoughts. Is just understanding who it is. And if you're dealing with enough people, it's like having so many things in motion that you're not focused on that one thing. Right. It's like looking at the mail. Did the check show up today? Did the check show up today? And that determines what kind of day you may have. And then you're thinking, will it show up tomorrow? But if things are just coming naturally, you kind of like feel like it's easier to settle in. And I think that's a big thing. And I think we talked about a little bit is slowing down has as much value as speeding up. That's why cars have a neutral gear and a reverse gear.
Right.
Sometimes you're better off just idling or checking your map or whatever you want as far as where you're going. And the other part is living life in the moment.
Right.
You should be on the march until you get to where you're marching to, and then you should enjoy where it was to justify the time and effort to get there. And again, habits become disciplines, and disciplines become more natural. Some people enjoy schedules. They enjoy understanding their lines. We've got a dog story from Christine. My dog does the same thing. My husband ran towards him and he thought it was a game and ran further away. Trick I learned is to follow him in the car. When he sees the car, he runs to it. Yeah, you got to have so many tricks. I'll tell you one more story about my dog. or our dog, is my son was, having some challenges. And, that's one reason why we got the dog for him, because we didn't have a dog. And we decided, it'd be good for the family and the kids. We didn't need any more responsibility. So the one day that he was about to go to school, the dog got out and started running down the street. And we lived on a cul-de-sac, and at the end of the street was a street and the school. And you could see him racing towards the street, and cars were coming and going, and my son was out there. And I said, please don't let this dog get hit, especially with him seeing what's going on.
Right.
And I'm just crossing my fingers, and he darts across the street, and he makes it. And I'm like, oh, great. But then he darts back across the street and he makes it. And then he darts back. And it's like, by that time, I'm still running down the block. And nothing happened. But just that element made me appreciate this dog is never going to get out on his own again if I can help it. But it makes you grateful for the things that don't happen. People are always like, I want this. And I'm always saying, I'm so grateful for the things I don't have,
right,
that other people have to experience. And I think when you feel blessed, when you feel you've gotten the best of most of everything, you almost, in a way, feel responsible to give back. You almost feel like you wouldn't have gotten it if it wasn't for you sharing it. And that's why I believe people get beyond the materialism, because at a certain point, how many cars can you drive? How many rooms can you sit in?
Yeah.
And it gets to the point where it's almost wasteful when giving to others, helping others, and doing things, because a lot of people, I had a gentleman work for me, and he was from Pakistan, didn't know the culture, and had to learn a lot. And I really worked hard with him, and he became a huge success and still is. And I remember, and every time he talked to me, it was always Mr. Don. No matter how much I said, you can just call me Don. And he said, no, I'm always going to call you Mr. Don,
right,
out of respect. And his name was Ali. And he said, let me ask you a question. I want to be a giver, and I want to contribute to charities when I get a lot of money. And I said, Ali, the way it works is when you have a little money, you give a little money. When you get more money, you can give more. But if you wait for more money to show up, there's never going to be enough money.
right,
And there's always going to be another day that you're going to wait for. And I think that also lends itself to immediacy. Sometimes you only have one opportunity to make a good impression, or you see somebody in need and you have a chance to make a decision. Say, I'm going to go over there and help that person, or that person looks a little lost. Maybe I can do something to help them out. Well, that gave you something more rewarding than what you were thinking about, because you're going to go back to thinking about that, but you'll always remember. And that also brings me back to a story Jim Rohn told me. And it was a interesting story. So I'll tell you what changed me quite a bit is I got a shoe shine one day. And it was just a great shoe shine. And I thought to myself, should I give this person $1 or a $2 tip? And I was back and forth. I gave him $1 tip. For the rest of the day, that bothered me that I didn't give him that extra $1. So the rule of thumb is, if I'm between two things, give the bigger, give the better.
right,
Because at least you're not going to think, why was I so chintzy, or why didn't I do that? The other thing he mentioned about tipping, which made a lot of sense, is he says, when I go out to an important dinner that I want to make sure runs as good as it can, I tip in advance. Right? So now it's like, hey, here's $20 or whatever it is. Make sure when we're talking, no one disturbs us. Make sure the water glasses are always filled, blah, blah, blah. So you're not taking a chance. And again, I think it's a matter of things that you have control over, that if you can do a little bit more in those areas, put a little bit more thought, and bring a little bit more awareness to it, it makes it more interesting for yourself. You know, you could do the same thing every day, but switch it up a little. You could change your route to your walk. You can decide little things that might make it a little bit better for you. So, you know, you seem like a very positive person, Jason. You know, how do you maintain that mindset through all your trials and tribulations?
The $1 million question. It's a practice, and it took a lot of time and a lot of, I've gone through times in my life where I wasn't so positive and wasn't so, whatever. And I don't think it's not about rose-colored lenses. It's about being realistic. And something that you were saying that I really loved is basically it comes down to being mindful and living in the moment. Because what happened when you don't, he didn't give the tip that he wanted to. So now he was living in the past, and he wasn't going about his day. He wasn't living where he was. He was living where he was at before, and it pulled him out of his day where he could have been making 1,000 times more of those dollars, that he was worried about. And so being mindful, and that's kind of what, to answer your question, that's what I do. I really process on where am I at right now, and I'm human. I'm a human animal. So there's times when this is coming up, and I've got to process this, and I've got to be prepared for this, or maybe I could have done this better. And then I just bring myself back to now, because that's where I'm living. I'm living in the here and now. And so when I just remind myself, hey, we talked about it yesterday. You have a roof over your head. You have food. You've got this stuff. You have all these very positive things. Being grounded in that and not worried about what's not there or what could show up, and being present with what's there. And I think that's what's key about, in the giving sense, is you're coming from a place of abundance, and having that knowing that everything's going to work out, and knowing that everything's going to show up in its right place, and that you're okay where you're at. Not, well, I better pull back here because this might show up, and I better do this because one time that happened. And you know what? It's all going to show up, and it's all here already. And you just be abundant and give in that way. And I think that's, for me, that knowing is what keeps me grounded and moving forward.
Yeah, that's so well put, and so important, because everything we're talking about, everybody can embrace, because it's not based on how much you have or what you know, but what you can do in the moment with what you have.
Right.
And kind words, a smile, pat on the back, it doesn't cost anything. And it also makes you part of something better than just the everyday, And at the same time, I respect people's privacy. I say hello every morning to people along my walk. I'd say a good percentage of them say hello back or smile, and many just already anticipate that you might say hello, and they start looking down at their feet. They start looking away, and it's like, I understand, and it's everybody's right to do what they're most comfortable with. So what works for me may not work for them, and that's what makes this world go round. But when you do find people like yourself who are already at that point in life, you feel like, hey, I'm in a community that understands and actually practices this, and it kind of goes from A to Z. I had a great comment from Ford Sykes today about the show he was on just in the last week or so, and how he thoroughly enjoyed it. And, all these people who, if you wouldn't know better, you would think, wow, they're at this level. But everybody's a person.
Right.
Everybody, they say everybody comes into this world with nothing. The worst they can do is break even, right? And everything here is borrowed and never owned. So you never know who that person is who will cross your path again. And because you are one of a few who do things that most people don't do, you get recognized by people who practice that.
Right.
And none of the people I know who are the biggest givers haven't also been the biggest receivers after the fact. So they give, not to get, but because they give and they keep giving, they end up getting, because you just never know who it is. I mean, there's stories of guys who walk into a Mercedes dealer looking like a bum, and nobody wants to talk to them. Nobody would give them a demo. And the story is one guy who went through that experience uh, walked right to the manager's office and said, "Did you know I came here to buy 2 cars today and nobody would even say hello to me?" And he ended up buying 2 cars from somebody else. But it's like, why judge? Even if someone you know doesn't have what it takes.
Right.
Well, if you got the time, why not say, here's a brochure, or let me share some information for you? Because the other thing I learned, you never know who knows who.
Yeah.
Right? So the guy who's down and out might have a brother-in-law who's a huge fan of whatever you're doing. And that simple gesture of kindness, sincere kindness, will go a long way. And the other thing is they're giving you practice for everybody else. So everything is an audition. Every show I do, I get a little bit better for it because little things creep in, stories are told, some elicit stories of your own that come to the surface. And I think yesterday is a great day when you think of the best of the yesterdays. Right? How many birthdays did you have? How many Thanksgiving or Christmases did you participate with family? And close your eyes and smell the food again and see the people around the table who are no longer with you. And you get to relive that experience. It's like a gift that keeps giving. And why not make every moment of every day as positive as you can, even under negative circumstances? Because sometimes it's like, well, I didn't have as much pain this time as last time. It doesn't always have to be joy and pleasure. Or I got in and it wasn't too bad. I used to be concerned with dentists. And when I started going to a dentist, there was probably a lot of reason to be concerned because the drills back then were foot pedaled, right? So the dentist had to keep pumping the thing to get the thing to swirl around, and it was just smoke was coming out of your mouth, and it was just awful. And every experience just made me want to not do it again. But then I said to myself, well, how long is this whole thing going to take when it's going to hurt the most? And I said, about 10 seconds. I said, well, count to 10. And when you get to 10, it's over. Right? And focus your mind on that. Well, look who's here. It's Charles Caldwell. Charles, welcome. Greetings from Hong Kong. Always loved Charles. When we were doing the weekend shows, Charles would always show up around Friday and Saturday night because actually when this show would start at 9 in the morning, it would be, I think, 10 or 11 o'clock at night at Hong Kong. And so to stay up till 11 o'clock at night just to be in the audience and then to come on the show, Charles is participating in one of the largest English-speaking schools in Hong Kong, has about 32,000 students. Just a great guy, somebody you should really take an opportunity to meet. Charles has been supporting us for a long time also, along with Christine and Marilyn. Looks like old home night or something, or homecoming for a lot of us. But it is always great to see Charles and Christine and Marilyn and knowing not only how good they're doing, but how good they are. So thank you, Charles. I know you're in Toronto. We didn't quite get it together this time, but I hope you had a really good visit and hope when you come back to Canada, that's usually the goal is once you get on the same time frame, because Charles does have to go to work every day. So getting on a show at 11 o'clock on a weekday and then having to start off early. But again, thank you, Charles. You mean a lot to the show and to me. And that's what's gratifying. It's not
Right.
only the things you do and the things you share, but the relationships. And most of it is heartfelt.
Yeah.
It's genuine, it's real. And how do you achieve that in less um, ways, or more superficial ways that don't bring you that benefit? So, I know that you're all about building communities, supporting communities, and see the value of interacting in those communities. What is the key to giving to those communities that make you a well accepted member of those communities?
It's a great question. I think showing up. I think showing up and being there. I'm a part of some communities that one of my veteran communities, and we meet once a month, and that's like our one big thing. But then we have like a Slack channel, and we have a bunch of other stuff that we do, and people don't show up, and they're part of the community, and I love and respect them all, but they don't participate. And so that becomes a challenge. And the person who moderates kind of the group and started the group, he's like, hey, the benefits in showing up, and that's it. And it's not about, well, you show up and you do something for people. It's you show up and you support and you just be there, and it's infectious, as you show up and you talk. And it's like kind of that's the thing I love about the LinkedIn lives, is that it's not scripted. We come in and we have a conversation, and the community pops in and adds to that, and then it might go in a different direction. And that's the key, is that being flexible, being able to go in different directions, and being open to the community, not coming in with an agenda. I think if you go into any, you become part of a group, but I have an agenda, and I want to do this, and I want to do that, and I think the group should do this, and the group should do that. That's not truly giving. That's giving for getting that outcome. And so I think the key for me is that I show up flexible. I'm the reed in the wind. Let's see what shows up. Let's see what happens, and let's go from there, and let's support each other. Let's have a good time, and let's all grow together. And I think that's the mindset that helps kind of make it work.
No, absolutely. And actually, today, every other Thursday, I get together with all the members of our collaboration group, and that's at 1 p.m. Eastern, which is an hour after this show is over. And it's just great to see what everybody brings to the table from the last 2 weeks,
Right.
because it's all a knowledge sharing. Here's what I learned, here's what I tried. Maybe it's a shortcut. Maybe it's a new guest that everybody should get to know and maybe invite, because you get to leverage, and just through syndication.
Right.
Like Jason says, everybody who has a show typically has everybody that they know is a quality person on their show. I was fortunate to be able to be the first of Harvey's guest, the first of Kelly's guest, the first of Carl's guest.
Nice.
So it's kind of honoring. Plus, everybody starting out needs guests anyway. So it works both ways. But, the gratification or the return on the giving is through the nice thoughts that people share with you, and even more importantly, about you when you're not there.
Right.
Your reputation continues to grow. And the reason why I found a big element to people's success on live streaming is frequency, consistency. There's a saying that repetition makes reputation. And the more people see over and over again, in the old days, it used to be a factor of like 6 impressions. So in other words, you had to hear a Coca-Cola commercial 6 times to understand it, because you weren't focused when it was going to come on. Sometimes when it's coming on, you're distracted, or it's a commercial, right? And you may not even be a Coca-Cola drinker. But after about 6 or 7, I got the message. And sometimes the message is subliminal, where you go into a store and you buy a 6-pack of Coke, and you never had a plan to buy it, but that was an impulse.
Right.
Well, I think if you take that same example, of people who get to see people over and over again, it becomes safer, it becomes more familiar, it gets to be more of an expected something, and you just enjoy being back together with people.
Right.
You know, how many people can't, it's like, hey, just being in a room with this person, just being in a conversation makes me feel better, but also increases my top of mind awareness because of the centers of influence that I'm with, right? If you were on a stage with someone great, your greatness would shine a little bit brighter because of the reflection of their greatness. And then all of a sudden, you get to the point where you say, I'm good enough. If I could pass the test for this person, then I think I've been validated. And
Right.
sometimes it's just a matter of you being the reason that you can't get out of your own way. Well, getting back to finishing up the impressions, on LinkedIn, they say it's about 27 now. So you've got to get 27 impressions, and it doesn't matter how. So it could be a post, it could be a comment, it could be a live stream. And when you collect it all, it's like, wow, now this person is elevated over the people I see here and there or aren't doing anything pretty significant. Um, and learning what works for others will probably work for you.
Right.
My partner that I always give credit to, and we were together for 12 years and best 12 years of my professional life, um, met over dessert one night. Had no idea who the guy was. You would have never known who he was by how he looked and the way he acted because I thought I was doing him a favor for a while, and because he was so modest. It turned out to be a billionaire, that had so much, but started with nothing and did it with his own two hands. And what impressed me so much about Fred was that you wonder, why does a guy not stop at 10 million or 100 million or whatever it is? How do you ever get to that point? Because along the way, you can say, hey, that's a lot. That's more than enough. But what you find is those people, the money was just a result of their activity. It
Right.
wasn't the reason for their activity.
Yeah.
And at that point, he was the best of all worlds. But also, I remember we always had like routines, I would call them. And he loved drinking wine and he was a connoisseur. And I'd always take him to the liquor store when he was here in Colorado because his kids lived here. And that's how we got to know each other pretty well. And he'd always say, well, I'm a senior. There's a 15% senior discount, or there's a baker's dozen. So always have that 13th bottle just in case. I mean, we're talking like really small change, but it was something that was important to him. He was
Right.
so principled. But at the same time, he was so generous. I mean, when he passed away, he created a foundation that he launched for $280 million.
Wow.
That was just for the city of Detroit. It was for Alzheimer's, which he ended up getting, and for the Great Lakes. He wanted to do something to continue to support that. And at the same time, thinking, well, geez, I'm running around the store for $8. And he wrote a check for 280 million. And the University of Michigan, he gave like 20 million. I mean, he just gave enormous amounts. And he really enjoyed it, because I think someone determines their legacy is worth it.
Right.
That they can keep giving after they're gone, and what they give can keep providing after they're gone. And, just being around somebody like that, I would have never understood that principle. And he would always take the time. He was one generation above me, I still don't got. Call me up, or I'll meet me in New York, or I got a big meeting. Let's get out to Napa and do this. And it was like, for sure. I mean, at a moment's notice, and I guess when you're just like, whatever it is, I'm there. Whatever, if I don't sleep for 2 nights, not a problem. And when you can be all giving because of the love people share with you, and the knowledge that they're there for you. And I think that's so important, is this person's always been there for me. I'm always going to be there for them.
Right.
And especially as it relates to older people or people that maybe are past their prime. When we took care of my mother for a couple of years in our home, and I would always tell my kids, now you watch everything I'm doing for my mother, because that's what you're going to do for me and your mother. Right? We're modeling for you.
Yeah.
And it continues that way. So, coming up almost on top of hour, I love these one-on-ones because they really give you a chance to relax into it. I also love the 3-ways and the 4-ways because
Right.
it's a little bit more dynamic.
That's what I was thinking.
But it also gives people a chance to hear a little bit more of a dog story, a partner story, because you're actually now absorbing that 20 minutes that was shared and taking that and saying, well, I've got 10 extra minutes on my 20 that I can get into things that I might not have, or remind me, or extend things. So how does what you're doing and what you're learning impact what you plan on doing or want to do going forward?
I think, I want to get better. And I think that, you start off and you're full of, excuse my language, piss and vinegar, and you're going to take on the world and you're going to make things happen. And you're like, I got this and I'm going to do it. And then as you grow into it, you realize that, what you don't know. And that's what I'm doing as I expand and I go on. And, I always talk about curious and flexible mindset. I see there's so much more opportunity to grow and to give and to do different things. And just recently, actually, I took a shift in my business and I said, you know what? I had a vision of doing and how I was going to, and some opportunities came up, and my wife shared some insight with me, like, hey, why don't we try this with your business? And it allowed for me to look at it from a different viewpoint and to say, oh, I can do it differently and get better results. And so that's been something that's key for me, is that just being open to that and saying, hey, let's see what else I can do. Let's see it. And honestly, a lot of that opportunity comes from being open to community, giving back to people. I go and I spoke at a veterans group last week. I do a free walking meditation. I do these things just to get out to community, just to meet people. And, it's obviously to have my name out there as well, but truly from my heart, it's just to give back. So if no one shows up, hey, I showed up. If 16 people show up, hey, let's have fun and let's join a community. So that's been for me the gift, is I get that gift of people showing up and learning myself. One other thing that I did want to mention that I think it's a point that needs to be made, well, I want to make for me, you were talking about the person walking into the Mercedes dealership and no one talking to them. The people that were there trying to sell cars, because what were they doing? They were looking at that instance as what's in it for me. And I think when we shift from what's in it for me to what's in it for us, that's the key. And if they would have just said, hey, like, you mentioned a couple of great points about what they could have got out of it just by talking to that person, but why not just talk to somebody first of all? But then, there's, okay, well, I can practice and I can get something out of it and I can see what my skill level's at. And, that's like a challenge to me. But anyway, I did want to bring that point up because I think it's so key that, look at it for what's in it for us. And that's a great way to start.
Yeah, that is an important point. I'm glad you did bring it up because it harkens back to the saying, no one cares how much you know until they know how much you care.
Right.
Right. And if someone is like, well, I could be doing nothing or helping someone, but I don't think they're going to buy anything, so why bother? You're already limiting yourself. And, the other thing about life, 90% of what you worry about never happens. The 10% that does happen, you had no way of knowing or controlling. But what I found is you never know when you're going to be discovered by who.
Right.
Because again, to your point, yeah, with your eyes and ears and your ability to kind of take a measurement of the environment or the people around you, that's too much work. Let your words fall on whatever ears are in front of you. And, why do most people feel it's okay to have a hand up instead of a hand down? They're always thinking, well, if this person discovers me or they like me, maybe I'll do this. But what about the person who was just in your position that you just moved up from?
Right.
And who's putting a hand down to them and saying, hey, I'll give you a lift for a little while, or I'll give you some support. And, there's something to the universe, and there's a lot of things, they say faith is the belief in the invisible.
Right.
And if you even don't know that it could mean anything, or if you believe there's nothing to this, and I'm just going to do it out of the kindness of my heart or because I feel like it, well, you have nothing to lose and everything to gain, because now you're practicing it. And the times you could have given and you didn't, you may not feel totally bad about it, but it's like this was a wasted opportunity. I mean, I do believe you pay your rent here on earth every day by how you treat other people.
Yeah.
And I think that how people view you, again, without, putting you on a pedestal or just giving you a lot of false respect, is, just people knowing that you're here. They're glad you're here. You took the opportunity. I used to spend so much time making phone calls to my family, because when me and my wife moved out to Denver, we didn't know a soul. And we left everybody we knew, and it was a lot harder to leave elderly relatives, who once you left, they might see you once a year, but they used to see you more often. And I remember we didn't have two pennies to rub together when we came out to Colorado. And I made an offer to everybody in the family: if you ever want to visit, I'll send you a plane ticket, I'll pick you up at the airport, and I'll put you up. Right? So you got a great trip to Denver, and you'd be doing us such a favor to bring family home to us.
Right.
And it was amazing how many people took advantage of it. And it became kind of a regular thing that people would schedule it. And even sometimes I had to put it on credit cards, right? And no one knew when they showed up that was the way it was.
Right.
But I always was able to continue to do it. And in a way, you didn't have to leave something to find something. You didn't have to say goodbye to somebody to say hello to somebody else. You can keep people in the game, keep people with you. And then the people who couldn't even travel, I'd have Sunday calls, and I'd make sure I talked to my grandfather every Sunday. And a lot of times I remember he couldn't even hear. And my wife would say, close the windows, you're screaming, because that's the only way he could hear what it was.
Yeah.
And I still remember those times that give me satisfaction now. And it would have been, what's easy to do is easy not to do.
Right.
And if it just takes a little bit, it makes you better, it makes you stronger, it makes you stretch a little. But, you could say, well, you put out the money and you took the time, but that's not taking into consideration how much benefit they gave me.
Right.
A stranger in a strange town now has some family, now has some opportunities to refresh relationships. You're either building or you're not building. And I always love to build. I always love to see what it's going to look like tomorrow. One last thing, I had a nephew who tragically passed away because of MS really early in his 30s and suffered. I mean, he just had a really aggressive case of it. And I'd go visit him. He was down in Arizona, and his name was Mark. And I said, Mark, what keeps you going? what is it about, without being draconian? And he says, you know what? I'm always curious what tomorrow's going to bring to this world. And I want to stick around to see what the latest news is. He was a big Red Wings fan and he was a big sports guy. And I always remembered that. And, if you can say, well, geez, if he can find happiness in the world that he's living in now, what do I have to complain about?
Right.
Why am I feeling sorry for myself? And until you have something to compare to, you don't know how relative you are to your situation. So, that same story, and we're a little bit over, is the boy who didn't have any shoes, who was feeling sorry for himself,
Right.
looked across and see the boy who didn't have any feet. Right.
Yeah.
So, I want to thank everybody. Jason, always end with final thoughts on your part. What would you like to say to cap this show off?
Thank you so much for being so giving, Don, and having me on your show. And I love being on here, joining the community. And it's been said, we've kind of gone through it all, but really, the one point I would make at the end is it's reciprocal. The universe is complete, and it's giving and receiving, and just be open to both, and show up for everyone, and show up for yourself. And life's a pretty amazing thing.
Well, it sure is when you're in it, Jason. I have to commend you.
Thank you.
And hope everybody is starting to appreciate what I've learned to appreciate in Jason. And reach out. Everybody that's on this show is accessible.
Yeah.
Everybody is open to more opportunity, is open to collaboration. And, once you understand that, now the responsibility is on your part to make that first introduction. And you never know what you don't know, right? So try it. If nothing else, it's the first knock on the door. Doesn't have to be the first and last. So with everybody, look forward to having you come back next Monday. And want to thank Jason and all my wonderful guests and old friends here today. And we'll do it